Welcome to today's episode, everybody. Today with us is Kieran Hedley, a mindset investor from New Zealand. He helps high performers invest in greater levels of calm, clarity, and confidence, and his personal story is so inspiring. He's a New Zealander who battled with diagnosed depression and crippling anxiety. Traditional therapy and trying to make it on his own didn't really click for him, and after hitting rock bottom enough, he decided to make a change. He took a new path of learning under a coach and from the teachings of Buddhism, and he sought new modes of healing. He also took his interest with neuroscience and treaded the path of science and spirituality, which has led him to where he is today. This story that he's about to share with you is vulnerable, is courageous, needs to be talked about in today's world, and it is going to be such an honor to listen. So let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Her Ascension Story podcast, where you get to hear the behind the scenes of inspiring life stories to help normalize the reality of the full human experience. I'm your host, Sarah Tillemont, and it's an honor to hold this space with each guest and with you. For more, follow the show on your favorite platforms and at Her Ascension Story on Instagram. And of course, feel free to share with your friends and your family to start your own soul chats like this. So first, I want to thank you so much for being here, Kieran. I recently saw one of your stories where you talked about sexuality as a man, especially in New Zealand. And I think that it's such an important topic to actually talk about because you talked about the relation to fear and anxiety around it. And sex in itself is so taboo to begin with. But when we couple it with this anxiety and fear, especially around not necessarily our identity, but who we really are. You talked about in your story, even exploring what the idea and what the possibility is for yourself. And a sexuality aside, I feel like it's something that so many people don't even dive into, like actually exploring what's possible for themselves and what they really consider authentic for them. And so I think first off, it takes a lot of courage. And second off, a lot of experiences with anxiety and fear to come to a place where you can even dive into that. So first, if you just want to talk about the anxiety and the fear that you felt around it, because in that same story, you said that you got a lot of replies about men feeling the exact same thing. So if you can start there, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I mean, of course, it's a little bit of a story. So I just wanted to double check, like, do you want me to go through my own experience of feeling shame and concern and anxiety through to the point where I had a revelation? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Like where that shame was actually rooted from and everything and how you dealt with it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's such a big topic and with so much of a background to that story. So I'll try to summarize it the best I can. But essentially, I have for a long time, without realizing, felt a sense of shame, concern, and fear, and then obviously, then as a consequence, anxiety around the question of what if I'm gay or what if I'm bisexual? And those two questions, which really come from the same fear, daunted on me for quite a lot of my life, honestly. Um, a lot of that does come from this idea of needing to be a manly man that gets really drilled into a male's mind in New Zealand, and I'm sure in many other countries, and Australia is very similar. And I'm sure many other countries can probably relate to this concept of needing to have a certain level of manliness and strength and uh, societally imaged, like perceived image of how I need to be, kind of self that I needed to constantly portray to my family, to my friends, to society at large. And because I needed to be this way, the concern of if I'm gay or if I'm bisexual, this won't fit into the societally and family and friend accepted image of how Kieran needs to be. So that's where essentially the fear came from, right? It's like the societally sort of pressured image of how men needed to be. And I felt that the pressure of if I wasn't manly enough, then I wouldn't be accepted in the way that I wanted to be, and I wouldn't be loved in the way I want to be loved, and therefore my level of perceived worthiness in terms of how I perceive myself would be deteriorated, and I feared that, obviously, so that's where a lot of anxiety came from, for sure. What's really interesting, and I'll get into that more later, but I have actually had a client quite recently who went through the exact same fear as that, which is really interesting because it was the exact same story. And once I heard that, I'm like, wow, other people went through this too. And then, that's when I came out and, shared a little bit more around that, and that's where you saw it. But yeah, it was really interesting going through that fear and then that shame of that, the fear of that shame as well, around possibly like destroying my quote unquote image. And I didn't realize this was going on, right, at all. And what ended up happening is, as I delved deeper into the self work, through meditation, through breath work, and all those goodies, I was I got to a Vipassana. Vipassana, for those that do not know, is a 10-day silent retreat where you spend about 110 hours meditating over the course of 10 days in complete silence. Can't speak to anyone, can't look at anyone in the eye, can't read, can't write, nothing, just purely in self. So, I was excited about that because I'm like, cool, I know there's so much stuff in there I'm going to face and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. So I was excited about the idea of going to Vipassana. Arrived, and the moment I arrived, I saw this beautiful man. He had long hair, quite tanned. I'm not sure whether he was part Maori or part Islander, in terms of like Samoan, Tongan, or Cook Islands or whatever that was. But there was some sort of aspects to him that had a darkening of the skin, and there was just like this real, had a chiseled jaw, beautiful features, good lips. And I remember I saw that. I'm like, what the heck, am I attracted to him? And I felt that weird sort of curiosity in my mind glow up. Now I'm going to backtrack so that I can lead into this with more fluidity. But when I was younger, when I was 12, 13, 14, about 12, 13, 14, I experimented with I was incredibly shy around women. I felt very straight at the time. So it didn't feel like it was from a place of wanting to be with a man, but it was from a place of wanting to express my sexuality, and feeling incredibly needing of some sort of sexual connection and some sort of release as well in terms of sexual tension. And I didn't know what to do with that. And it's clear that my friend didn't know what to do with that. And we explored that together, and it was very interesting reflecting on that, because that naturally tied into that thought of, what if I'm gay, what if I'm bisexual, having those memories of that experience with my friend, even though I was knowing that it wasn't from a place of attraction. Because I'd run through my mind, well, I wouldn't want to kiss him, but here I am wanting to explore these things physically in a sexual way. So what's going on here? Now, with that development of sexual identity, I suppose, sort of being challenged in a sense of how I believed I needed to be compared to how I felt I was moving toward, that naturally flowed into that time in Vipassana when I saw that guy. Now, bearing in mind I'd been with only women in terms of a romantic sense up until that point. Now, come to the Vipassana, I'm just focusing on the practice. They're teaching you sort of the process, the breathing, and the meditation and so forth. About 2 days into this, I would every now and again see this guy, and I'd have these thoughts come back up of, what if I'm attracted to him? What if I'm actually gay or bisexual? And I finally got to the point within myself, for my entire life, I'd set this barrier, imaginary barrier in a way, it was sort of like a boundary I'd set mentally within myself, psychologically, where I wouldn't allow myself to perceive myself romantically with a guy. So I wouldn't allow myself to imagine myself romantically with a male in a way where I'd build something with them. And I was fearful of, what will my parents think? What will my friends think? What will society think? How will this deteriorate my image and therefore my self-worth? So I finally allowed myself to go past that blockage. I imagined myself through meditation just actually being with this guy fully, actually being completely intimate with this guy, completely and I mentioned I didn't want to kiss my friend, I actually just allowed myself to go through that as well with this guy in my mind. And as I allowed myself to do that, and as I allowed myself to actually explore the idea of me being with this guy romantically in my mind, which I was so terrified of, by the way, like, so this took actually a lot of courage for me. Um, and then allowing myself to see what the reaction of others around me would be, and then actually allowing myself to process any people that then therefore judged me as a consequence of, you know, me deciding to go down that route of being in a relationship with a man. And I finally, over that process, allowed myself to find a sense of forgiveness for, first of all, the fact that I'd had so much resistance, because I understood why that resistance was there. And secondly, a feeling of forgiveness for those that would then therefore judge based on the societal pressure that they would also feel. I understood, wow, the pressure that I feel, everyone else feels. I see it now, like I see it so clearly. Hence why they are then going out ahead and judging others. So I can see where the judgment is coming from them because of their lack of ability to, you know, move through the resistance they feel. And I understood that, and I could feel the like a forgiveness coming through for them. Like, okay, you know, if they end up judging me, it's not because of the fact that I'm unworthy or I've, you know, I'm not good enough. It's because they're unable to see like past that level of resistance that's been painted in society around what is good and what is not good, and what is worthy and what is unworthy, what is right and what is not right. So yeah, it's just that inability to see past that. So I have compassion there. And the final thing that I noticed was I was able to get past these barriers that I put up within myself psychologically, to the point where I could finally explore and express and experience within my own self what that would be like, whether or not I was genuinely at this point in my life in a place where I was attracted, I was wanting to be romantic with men, whether I was not. And this is where I could finally be honest with myself whether this was true or not. And to, very honestly, I finally realized for the first time in my life, honestly, that I wasn't wanting to be romantic with a man. And what then the funny thing is obviously, you know, like the build up to that story almost sounds like I'm building up to be like, oh, you know, wanting to be romantic with a man, but there's nothing right or wrong or better or worse about whether that ends up being, from my perspective anyway, whether that ends up being, oh, I am a man that is attracted right now to just women. I'm a man that's attracted to both sexes. I'm a man that's attracted to humans. Whatever that ends up being, right? Because there's so many different ways that people can go and express. There's no better or worse, right or wrong. And it's just from my perspective, when I finally came to that understanding, I was able to allow myself to be on equal ground, regardless of which way I went, which allowed me to finally be honest with myself about what it is I really wanted, intimately, relationship wise, sexually. So that's sort of the story about it. But I came out of that obviously like experience, finally not just being able to be free of that fear of shame that would come from if I was. It allowed me to as well acknowledge the beauty in men without feeling like worry or fear about it. Like, oh, but if I acknowledge that, then it might mean this, right? So I was finally able to be like, nah, that man is beautiful, and actually feel that and actually be able to acknowledge that, because I can see that now, and before I couldn't. I'm able to say it to my friends, like I'll say to my guy friends, like, mate, you're a gorgeous man, eh? And be able to say that with confidence and not like the fear of being judged. And it's beautiful being able to express that. And then also as well, not being in a fear of what if one day I end up being gay, bisexual, whatever it ends up being, is that I end up sort of, I guess, being or experiencing in that sense. I mean, because right now, obviously, as I mentioned, that I feel attracted to women sexually, intimately, relationship wise, but it doesn't mean that I always will. So that's where I'm at, and I've accepted that. So that's the story. Hopefully, yeah, that's what you wanted there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You touch on so many different things. First, you know, the very last part, the impermanence of things and being okay with the impermanence of things, even when it comes to our identity. And I think that in this world, we grasp for things that we can control or things that we can solidify, because everything is changing so quickly around us and in our lives, and especially around our age, 20s, 30s, 40s, everything is just changing so quickly, even, and just evolving. And we're always thinking, I just need to get to that place where everything's the same and then there's stasis or whatever. And so we never allow ourselves to think, well, what if I change? And of course, at the same time, like it's not just like a growth. Like, what if I change in my identity? So that impermanence is so beautiful to accept. And then even to release that shame. It's just incredible, the release of the fear of the shame as well. But you did talk about how there were barriers, specific barriers, maybe, to even come into that place of honesty with yourself and step outside of that duality of right, wrong, good, bad. Can you talk a little bit about those barriers and maybe what you think your friends or anybody else you've talked about with experiences too?
Yeah, totally. So the barriers I had perceived were purely this concept of self-preservation. Self-preservation, of course, being a primary focus of the brain. From my understanding of that, it very easily crosses into a field of needing of acceptance, based on this concept that I need to be in some form of call it tribe or community, some sort of sense of supported security. And when I reflect on it, I was so fearful of the idea of being pushed out of community, pushed out of like an accepted tribe or whatever that might look like. And that tribe and that community being, my friends, my family, my clients, even, the people that follow me on Instagram, and that fear was there, and I didn't want to acknowledge that because I felt almost pitiful that I was afraid of that. I only realized that like the idea that ignorance is bliss is the funniest thing. I was so caught up in this idea of ignorance without thinking that I was ignorant because I thought that I wasn't ignorant. It's a funny cycle of it all. I thought wasn't ignorant, but really I was ignorant because I thought I wasn't ignorant. So it was this crazy thing. So that's why what was amazing about obviously going into the Vipassana is that I was able to be aware of my ignorance and be able to peel back the idea that, oh well, I actually was ignorant, and being able to delve into that. And obviously reaffirming the idea that ignorance is not bliss. It's like what I love is the story of ignorance is bliss until you hit the ground. If you jump out of the plane and you're ignorant that you don't have your parachute on, well, you're going to enjoy the ride until you hit the ground. I mean, I love this experience. I was in Africa with, except this is tie into the point about barriers, but I was in Africa with my sister and my parents, my family, basically, of course. My mum was a travel agent, so I was very blessed actually at quite a young age, like being in high school at the time. We were able to travel to some pretty cool places. And we're in Botswana, the Kalahari Desert specifically. And the Kalahari Desert is home to what, from my understanding, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that they are the biggest lions that you can find on Earth. They're black-maned lions, their names, and they're slightly bigger than your normal African lion or zoo lion or whatever kind of lion you might find. And that being said, obviously they're going to paint a bigger silhouette when they're coming across the horizon and they're starting to walk towards your safari, right? So here we are, my family, the two guides, and I think another married couple, I think it was, from memory, years ago, right? And we're on the safari. This big black maned lion silhouette is like, walking towards us with its like, shoulder muscles coming through, as it's doing its walk. And like, when I reflect on that, me being ignorant about the fact that there's a lion there doesn't change the fact that there's a lion there. And like, when I thought about that and really understood that, and I am able to apply it to these blockages, these barriers, these psychological insecurities that I was ignorant of, it doesn't change the fact that they were there. So what was really a revelation for me is like sort of thinking about stories like that, where actually ignorance is not bliss, because the more aware I am of these things, the more I could do about them. Well, that which I'm aware of, I can reverse engineer. And what was interesting is, of course, during that experience, here I am in wonder, like in awe. I'm like, oh, is a cool lion. Here the guides are, right? The guides are just like, yeah, just another day. There my parents are, with the camera and just like taking pictures, and then the couple doing the same. And then there my sister is lying on the floor crying on the middle, on the safari, like, oh, it's a lion. And like the lion ended up coming right up to the safari and, brushing its fur right against the truck and then moving on. And that was it. But the beauty of that is like when I use that example, I get to apply it here because there's the awareness of the lion that doesn't change, but then there's the meaning of the lion. Every single person on that safari made a different meaning of the lion, yet it was the same lion. So it was purely based on the meaning that was made out of it. But then there was a reaction to that meaning. So there's those three layers that I can become aware of based on that story, which was there's the awareness of the thing, the awareness of the insecurity, or the barrier, or the blockage. There's the meaning I make out of that. But then there's how I respond to that meaning thing, and then the reaction. But it's the thing, the meaning and the reaction. And the meaning I can change over time, but it takes time. But the way I react or respond to that, I can do instantly. That's what was really amazing during that process, where I was exploring, okay, well, there's this awareness of I'm attracted to this guy. There's the meaning I'm making out of it, which is that could mean that I am gay or bisexual. Then there's the way I was reacting to it, which was I don't want to think about that. I want to get away from that. That was the reaction based on the fact that the meaning was if I was gay or bisexual, then I would be pushed away from society. I would not be accepted the way I want to be accepted. So just in that moment, the way that it shifted for me was just simply I responded to it differently, and I chose a different route, which was instead of running away, I leaned into it, and I embraced it. Now, to answer your other question around, like, have I talked about these sorts of barriers with other people? Yes. So one in particular was a client of mine that I've worked with who went through the exact same thing. We got to explore that together, and how he worked through it was same process, which was like leaning into it, embracing it, and learning to come to a place of internal forgiveness again, and compassion for those that might judge, possibly, so that it can remove the idea of worst case scenario. And once he was no longer afraid of the worst case scenario, he was able to lean into it. So that was like a process that I got to, very blessed, honestly, to be able to work with someone alongside that. So it was, a journey I got to go through myself. And then in terms of like other people that I've really been inspired by, it's been really awesome. Like there's not specific examples I can give on this because I've just seen it so much, where I've got male friends who are completely open about their sexuality in terms of like they're fully attracted to other men, like whether it's been bisexually or in terms of completely going for the purely interest in men, or the pure interest in men, and being able to be so expressive about it to the point where, like, not in a point where it's like sort of I need you to think that this is a better way, which I've had the vibe of before. Not in terms of, I'm not just saying about like one particular way has done that to another particular way, but it happens all over. But these men have shown almost more manliness, which is really interesting in the sense where like they've just purely and authentically showcased that you can be fully accepted, you can be fully embraced by your friends around you with no judgment, when they fully embrace their sexuality. And to be able to see that, like, I won't name names. Actually, you know what? I'm sure he wouldn't mind because he's so open about it anyway. His name's River. I met him in university, and this guy, like, he'd, do slut drops on like in the dance floor and things like that, and like he'd really rock it, and I'd loved it. And he'd literally, he was so open and expressive about it. He even showed that he was interested in me. And I just told him straight up, like, look, man, I'm not into that. I'm not interested. And he's like fully embraced it, and we got to be friends. And it was really beautiful that we got to explore that, and I got to witness that and be inspired by him. And it was more later that I got the inspiration, because at the time that wasn't what was on my mind, and I wasn't really at that level to explore that. But when I reflect on that, I gained a lot of inspiration from him. I gained a lot of inspiration from another male about 2 years later, or about 1 year later, who was bisexual, and he's fully open about that. And to see the like ability to show that, like, and again, like that ability to be fully embraced and accepted, without the resistance to leaning into those the meanings that they were making out of it, and the probability or possibility that they might be quote unquote ashamed on, and being fully expressive, to me was honestly the most inspiring thing. So yeah, I'm really hoping that share, that point would actually, in a way, show that people can be actually more inspiring than not when they lean into their sexuality in a fully embracing way, not in a way to prove a point, but in a way to just simply do it for the sake of, well, helping culture and helping self to recognize that it's okay, but as a consequence, society and culture as a consequence will recognize that it's more okay and more manly, quote unquote manly. I say manly not in a sense where men have to be manly, but in the sense where the term manliness comes from this concept of what is accepted in society, and men needing to be strong. And again, in my perception, my perspective, that for me is one of the strongest things a man can do. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question too.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually something that I was just talking with my husband about the other day, like how we have these fears and the shame around not just our identity and not just our sexuality, but who we really are, how people might perceive that, and how really confidence comes from authenticity. And if you look at like a spectrum, the opposite of confidence could be shame, it could be fear. And so like on one of the spectrums, if like confidence is in the middle, then at noon then that's shame, at 3 o'clock it's fear. And so things just kind of go on their own little thing. But so being willing to embrace your own truth and your own authenticity, it does take a lot of courage to even discover that and to question, outside of, in New Zealand, here in America, in many different countries, manliness is the masculine, it's the macho, it's the strength, and it's not ever perceived of manliness or being strong as knowing who you are and sharing that confidently. Yeah. So it's like, that's just like a status quo, like breaking, like a paradigm shattering kind of perception to actually allow yourself to question and then go into, no, this is who I am. And then having confidence from that and rooting into just who you really are and letting that bloom and flourish and thrive within you. And then it's like a domino effect. That's your ripple effect in the world when you're showing up as you and you're shining your light, or just, I mean, our light, I mean, our shadow, our fears, just talking about the truth of who we are as our light or whatever. And then that just ripples out and it impacts everybody. And it's so inspiring, so inspiring.
Oh man, it really is. For me, it's the most inspiring thing, seeing someone fully embodying their truth, who they are, not for the, again, it's not like when it's, you can tell like when it's for the sake of needing to preach something, like you get that vibe from people, which is totally fine. Like I'm not against it. Like that's brilliant that, they're trying to make a point. I'm all for it. But like there's definitely a difference when someone comes from a place of genuinity, when they're genuinely expressing it for the sake of just simply owning themselves. And that is it, for the sake of owning themselves. And then being unafraid to take a bold step as, this is who I am. I don't know many others, or maybe any others in my life or in my circles, that are expressing themselves in this way, but I'm going to do it anyway. And just for that, from that place of genuinity, as a consequence, people can see that and feel that. I know for myself, I do. And I am more inclined to follow in those footsteps when someone comes from that like genuine place. It's sort of like sales, right? Like when someone is trying to sell you on a point, like there's always like a resistance there, and it's like, I don't want to go that way. But when that's why I love it when people just step forward in like a fully genuine way of like, hey, this is just my truth. I just want to share it, and if you resonate, that's amazing. I'm not here to tell you how things need to be, and yeah, that's definitely something that I'm still learning to live by, honestly. So I always have like an inclination of like, come on guys, it's like, because like something really works for me, I'll be like, come on guys, you should try this, like I'll get so excited. But then I'm selling someone an idea, which and like I'll still catch myself doing that all the time, and I'll just take a step back. But I know that that'll actually give them more resistance to taking that step. Then if I'm just simply and genuinely sharing a truth of, and from an authentic place of how I am, and what I've been through, and like my own experiences, I think that from my point of view anyway, is the most powerful thing.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. But like you said, your very first barrier was that fear of our innate, our biologically wired need for community, for survival, et cetera, and for ultimately acceptance or into that tribe, into that community. And so it's like we literally have to go against our nature to question who we are. And it's so scary, so scary.
Yeah.
So what would be like a number one tip for people just questioning who they are, identity, sexuality, etc.? But like, what would you say? What would your number one piece of advice be for that?
Yeah. Like as you mentioned, my piece of advice being purely from my own experience, and some might relate, some might not, and it's like totally okay. So I'll just share based on what worked for me. And I guess it ties into, there's two things that tie into one. So one thing was like a deeper understanding of why, like where did this come from, and understanding that sort of like community based need, and then understanding that it was purely self-preservation, and understanding, okay, well, why, like going even deeper than that, like why do I feel the need for community? Is like, will I actually be okay if I don't have community? And like I reflected on that for quite a while, and being able to explore this concept of, well, what if I became so okay with the worst case scenario that I no longer feared the worst case scenario? And I was able to explore that point. So that's sort of where I went into. So I got a deeper understanding of why primitively I craved like societal acceptance. And I understood, okay, well, if I'm in a community, then, I have food supply, I have support, I like people go out and hunt if I'm sick, or, I have support from others, and like, other people doing the things, and like we've got things working. Okay. But I can get all of that on my own now, because like of the society that we live in and the community that we have. And, I can literally, if I needed to, I could live at home for 6 months. Like, I mean, look at, the lockdown situation, people kind of were forced to in a way, and you can still make a living, you can still be fine, you still like get by. And, maybe it is harder, maybe it is more difficult, but survival is possible. Like, I'm still alive, even though lockdown happened. That is valid proof that, okay, even though I do crave, connection, I was still okay with that. And being able to be honest with that helped me to realize that these primitive needs, the brain obviously hasn't had enough time to adapt to societal norm today. I mean, it's been 50 to 100 years since we've been more capable of doing this, and only really 20 or 30 years since I've been able to order food to my door, and actually be fully able to just live at home, and not needing to go out or anything to be able to survive. So obviously, over the course of how many hundreds of thousands of years that this brain has been developing, it's only understandable that the brain still, primitively is that way. So as I understood this process more, as I understood a bit more around, okay, what does, when I'm in a survival state, do? Okay, well, it triggers amygdala activity, which triggers hypothalamic activity, which triggers adrenaline, which triggers, a fight or flight response. So I'm like, okay, well, what if I could decrease that fight or flight response during the perceived fear of these things? And I started applying this idea of exposure therapy that we get taught, right? Or we get taught like in therapy and things like that. I started applying that to more physical fears, so things like heights, or things like meditating in public, right? So like that sort of like, so it was more of a physical thing where I could go in public and meditate, and then feel like I'm being judged by others when I'm not really. People are just looking at me, and maybe projecting an insecurity if they are, but that's it. Otherwise people just move on. They'll be like, oh, there's that weirdo, and then they'll move on and they'll forget about me. So who cares? And that was it. So I got to play it out there. And then that's where that came to what you're asking here, which is I got to play it out more internally within myself, where I would then get to apply this idea of exposure therapy within myself, where, as I mentioned around the process that I did, I exposed myself to the worst case scenario in my mind, which was my perceived worst case scenario, even though I don't see that anymore as that the case. But my fear was I would be gay, I would be attracted to men, I would be sexually and romantically involved with a man, because that's what I felt the only way I could find connection was to be. And then I would be pushed out societally. I wouldn't have a career as a coach anymore. I wouldn't be accepted by my parents. My sister would think I'm a wacko. She wouldn't accept me. My friends would turn away from me. All these things. So I actually processed all of that. So even though it sounds almost crazy to think about, like, why would you imagine that? For me, it was once I actually allowed myself to be with those thoughts enough, and actually be with those images enough, I came to a place where I realized, actually, if I was all alone, I know that would suck, but I actually would be okay. And I actually would then be able to go and find new friends. I would have the time, the available energy now, the available capacity to then find new friends that were maybe more aligned, to find new people and new circles that would be more open to accepting this new version of myself, who's more authentically me. Right, that would become possible. And yes, there'll be a point of loneliness, but I've already kind of gotten over that in the sense where I've practiced spending more time alone. So again, exposure therapy. And that would be okay. And it was just really leaning within myself into those worst case scenarios to the point where that sort of amygdala activity becomes less, because my brain realizes that this isn't as threatening as what it perceived it to be previously. So that for me was a big shift, the understanding of why, and then the actual implementation of exposure therapy within myself, within my mind, within my psyche. Yeah, those were like in a combination sense, that was something that really helped me. Hopefully that step would help another as well.
That's amazing. Well, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to share all of this and to share, the vulnerability and also the courage and the wisdom and the lessons in it all. So just thank you so much.
Oh man, thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad that we had an opportunity to speak on this, because yeah, like you said, it's such a needed conversation, and yeah, I'm really grateful that you're doing what you're doing, and speaking up about the things that you are, and bringing to light a lot of these topics that need to be talked about more. So thank you for the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the show. Thank you so much for being here and sitting in this circle for our chat today. If you feel called, let me know how this impacted you by leaving a rating or review, and I'll see you next time.